Good morning all. Today I've got some PCBs from JLC PCB. Now I don't say they're new because they're not. Let's take a look in the box. I've actually had these for quite a while. Let's have a look at the date. Yes, 2019 April. My goodness, that's a year and a half. And at some point I obviously cheated, slipped a board out. I think I showed it in a video actually, but I can't remember. But anyway, these are Femto V2 version 2 solar charge controller boards, which I now have a fairly urgent requirement for. So let's break this apart conventionally this time and take a look at these. There are obviously a lot of these boards. How many have we got per panel? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 3. 6 threes are 18. 180 of these. That's quite a lot. So why have these sat for a year and a half without me actually doing anything with them? Well, because there wasn't really an urgent need for solar charge controllers, but that situation has changed now because now I'm in the workshop. The lighting, these lights up here, are running off a couple of lead acid batteries which are indirectly charged from my solar charge controllers. And I've just noticed that there seems to be a bit of a problem with the current coming from my solar power wall. And in fact, actually, these lights have been on and have brought that current right up to 310 milliamps. In fact, let's just turn these lights off and the battery voltage will recover. Now, this was this morning at something ridiculous like 70 milliamps. It was 0.07. So there's just nothing coming through from the power wall. Why is that? I mean, there are 3 80-watt solar panels here and 3 very large Trojan lead-acid batteries behind these panels. The problem is, it would appear, this solar charge controller seems to have packed up. It was just doing these weird reboots. Whereas now, it seems that there's absolutely no activity on there at all. Now, we have had 3 days of pretty much continuous rain, so I think the rain's got to that when it's finally packed up. Time for 3 new solar charge controllers, 1 per panel. That was the original intention. They handle 5 amps each, these controllers, so I have to have 1 per panel. That's why I've got 3 separate batteries linked together by those sort of daisy chain links which are hanging up on those hooks. And this time the charge controllers are going inside waterproof boxes like this with a clear front so that you can see the flashing LED which tells you what the charge controller is doing. I've got one of these. I'm going to get 2 more. So initially I'm just going to get one of these charge controllers charging that center battery, and then eventually I will get all 3 charging from their own independent solar panel. So let's take a look at these. These are V-scored, so I can just break them apart like so. Let's get in a bit closer. So this is the board. We've got 8-pin PIC microcontroller there. Of course, it's a surface mount version. Most of the components are surface mount, apart from the MOSFET, and there's a good reason for that because I use the legs of the MOSFET as cable attachment points for the positive side incoming and positive side outgoing. All surface mount components on the back. I know that's the voltage regulator there. And in fact, when I start assembling this, I'll probably put the regulator on first, because if I get the regulator on and a couple of caps, then I can test this board just with those few components, just as a voltage regulator. I can put 12 volts in and see if 5 volts comes out. Now, I do have another version of this, and it's this one, and it's one I made up, and I'm pretty sure it's identical. Possibly we can compare them. But it was when JLC PCB had first brought out their PCB assembly service, and so I had some of these boards made up with components from LCSC assembled by JLC PCB, so that half the components are on here already. So probably what I'll do is make one of these up and a couple of these, just for variety, because a lot of the components are already on there, and I kind of feel like, particularly as today's a rather nice sunny day, we've had 3 days of pretty much continuous rain, I'd like to get this up and running as quickly as possible. So possibly I'll make this one up as my first one, because several of the components are on here already, and then I'll make up 2 of these for the other 2 panels and batteries, and of course I have to wait for my other 2 waterproof boxes to arrive. Now, there are very few silkscreen markings on this board, really just the title, PWM5 Femto version 2. This is slightly smaller than the original version, which I might have. Yes, here they are. This is the V1 PWM5. Oh, there really aren't very many markings on that at all. And I've also found in my project box the gumstick version, which was a sort of long, thin version, which had some through-hole components. And this one, which is the entirely through-hole version. This is the PWM5 through-hole. But we're not doing that today. We're doing the surface mount Femto. Yes, one of the problems with the original, let's get this camera to refocus close up, the original V1 Femto board is that the LED was actually on the underside. It's not going to refocus. Yes, the LED, which is this large 1206 component, is on the underside of the board. Now, that looks okay until you put all the attachment wires on, which 2 come in this way and 2 come in this way, and that covered over the LED, which was not ideal. So one of the things I've done on the Femto V2 is I put the LED right on the end there on the top side of the board, so the wires will be underneath like that. The other thing I did was I got the board size down to 1 inch by ½ an inch. Now that was kind of an obsession, really, a bit OCD, because the original board was 1.1 inches by ½ an inch. So I managed to both move the LED and get the board slightly smaller. And I don't think I've ever actually tested the V2, either this blue version or the part assembled green version, so it'd be a very good thing to test it and make sure it works. So I guess now it's time to stop yakketing and start assembling. So I was just staring at this, trying to work out where I'd put my 12 volts to feed power into the regulator, and then where I'd pick off the 5 volts. I'm just going to break this actually, see if I've made those mouse holes. I think they're called mouse holes or mouse bites. Big enough that that will break. Yes, it will. I just need to break off that section. Right, quick check of the 5 volt regulator. I've got a low current power supply coming in. Ground is there. Now, input of the regulator is on the tab because it's the center pin. You can see my input voltage on the left side, 8.83. Can I get it on there? Yep, and there's the output voltage. It's dropping because I've come off that pin, and it's 5.01 volts. Good, so the regulator part of that board is fine. Right, I've come into the office momentarily because I don't actually have any chairs in the workshop yet, and so I can't do this fine soldering without a chair to sit on. Right, that was my test wire just to check the 5 volt output. Now I've noticed there are some components not on here. On this corner there's a 1N4 and 4.8, and there's a little marker there actually for direction, so I can put that on. I've got a few bits in this bag. There are 2 dual diodes down here, a BAV99 and a BOR 56. I can't remember which way round they are, so I'm going to have a look. And then the other things are the LED, its series resistor up there, and there's a 100N capacitor which is across the VCC and ground pins of the PIC, and of course I need to put a PIC on there. Now I've programmed some PIC microcontrollers, which I did by watching one of my previous videos, and so there's no point going over that again in this video. I'll put a link to that video in the description below, and it's going to be to the Odysee video hosting site, because all my videos get transferred over to Library, and there's now a new interface called Odyssey. You can watch that video there with no adverts. That's one of the advantages of Library / Odyssey. So link to that if you want to see how I programmed the microcontroller. Right, this is the 1N4148, which goes up on that top corner. Let's get the thing out first. Oh, that's very tiny, isn't it? Okay, so the first thing to do is just touch the iron on one of these pads. I need to clean my iron. Incidentally, I've discovered that a sponge works better for low temperature when you're... I'm just printing out the layout, the schematic. Yeah, sponge works better for low temperature, but when I go to high temperature, my Ryobi iron, which is at 480 degrees, I find this much more effective. Sponge just doesn't work at that temperature, but it does seem to work much better for me when I'm running at 350 degrees, which this should be. Yep, it is. Right, let's just put a little blob of solder on that end. See if I can get this diode on. Can't see anything on there. There is a cathode marking on there. Yes, it's on the left. I find that either using close-up lens or just flooding it with light helps. So that needs to flip around the other way. That needs to go that way. And then I should blue tack that board down really, because I'm going to have problems if I don't. But let's... Oh, the soldering iron cable is wrapped around my arm. Oh. Yes, blue tacking that down would help. Really need some more magnification on this. So how well have I done that diode? Even under the magnifier it's extremely tiny. But yes, on that bottom right corner, marked A2, that's as close as I can get it. I think that's fine, and I think it's pointing in the right direction. Right, I think the schematic will help at this point. I need to fit this Bohr 56, which has the two diodes pointing in the same direction, away from their anode, common anode there. The BAV99 is different in the fact that it has two diodes pointing in opposite directions. So the cathode of this one and the anode of this one are commoned there on pin 3. I've got those components. There's one of them, the BAV99. Let's get them on the board. Right, it looks like the Bohr 56, this dual diode, is this left-hand one down here, and the right-hand one is the BAV99. Let's get them on. Right, 150 ohms is the series current limiting resistor for the LED. Can I make out anything on there? Oh yes, 151. That's the kiddie. I shall film this one, why not? Try and pick this little one up. Stick him on there. Solder one side, that looked quite promising. Flip it round. And solder the other side. It's really just a case of sticking the solder on, or soldering it, but not being really able to see what you're doing. And then getting the magnifying glass and checking it afterwards. And actually that one, top left, looks pretty reasonable. So yeah, happy with that. Now I couldn't find the 100N, that's the component that sits across the V+ and ground pins of the microcontroller. So I've had to go to a reel of 100Ns. I believe these are 100Ns. Yeah, 100 nanofarads plus or minus 10%, 25 volt. I'll cut some of those off. Right, soldering on the 100N. Got to keep cleaning the iron because the amount of solder on the tip is just far too much for doing these tiddly little surface mount things. Let's put that one round that way. Pick up the 100N. Try and get one side of it on flat. Oh, that's not too bad. Flip it around. Do the other side and then smarten up the first side. It's a little bit lopsided, but I think it's okay. Let's have a close look at that. And near the top of the board, that is the, well, quite obviously, capacitor. item. Now, because it's not sitting quite centrally, its connective end is probably sitting on top of that track running between its pads, but it is covered in silkscreen, not silkscreen, the other one, solder resist, so that should be okay, I guess. Now probably the easiest component, because it's a 1206, which is big surface mount, and that's the big blue LED. Now the marking for the cathode and anode on this one is on the bottom, but there is sort of a shape that you can identify to see which way it's pointing, and it is kind of slightly arrow shaped. I wonder if I can get the magnifying glass on that right now, if you can see it, and not too well, but there's a vague arrow shape pointing to the top, and indeed that points to the top on here, because it goes to the resistor, and that goes to this pin on the microcontroller, which I know is ground. Okay, let's get this one on. It is the big one, so it should be the easiest one. Yeah, that seemed to go on pretty well. It's not quite straight, but at my age you kind of feel it's good enough, because you can't really see what you're doing with any of this stuff. That is on. So I think I've arrived at the point where actually all that's to go on now is a programmed microcontroller. So let me go and get those. They're in the workshop. So here are my programmed microcontrollers. I've marked them as CC 1.3, charge controller, firmware 1.3. Let's get that bit of Bluetech out of the end. Get one of these pre-programmed micros, and I checked them all. Well, I verified them all, because the programming software does that anyway. Now, one of the pads, pin 1 will go to the top like so. One of the pads I caught while I was soldering these diodes, so it's pre-tinned. So that's the one to solder on first. It isn't a corner pin, unfortunately. I guess I'll video this. Ah, my iron has gone cold. Let's just tin that up. There's a little bit of what you might call slag, I suppose, on there. Right, let's get that pin down. Yes, I think that went down. I'll check the alignment of all the other pins. Not perfect, but I can probably bend that. Oh yes, I can bend that. Yeah. It's a little bit off to one side. Actually, I could straighten that up a bit. Let's have a little close-up of that. Yeah, I think that's fine. Now, the thing to do now is put power on this, and then the microcontroller will measure the 12 volts and flash on the LED up at this end. Flashes to indicate the voltage. So let's see if that works. So 12 volt courtesy of some Eneloops. Negative, positive, and then I need some means of attaching these to points on here. These are a bit big, so let's get some wire cut-offs. Okay, let's do it. Ground, let's check my soldering iron's not melting anything, are these three at the top. Positive is this one at the bottom, pretty sure it is. So it's booted. Now we need to wait. 1, 2. About 12.7. Yeah, that seems to be working. Oh, I noticed that this was conveniently hanging around, so let's check whether it is 12.7. 0 volts onto there. Ah! Okay, let's try that. Oh, 12.89. Well, it's close, isn't it? In fact, that flashing might have been 12.8. I don't know. But yes, that's pretty close.